Okay, chapter 7 is the emerging nationalism. Again, what is nationalism? It is a devotion to or advocacy for national independence and unity. There must be causes or factors that awaken Filipino nationalism. 1. The opening of the Philippine ports to international trade or world trade. This was because of the suggestion of the Spanish economist Sinibaldo Dimas. Second, the rise of the middle class. Those poor farmers were able to augment their status in life from being poor to middle class after joining the international trade, since their products were greatly demanded from Europe. The middle class Filipinos were able to send their children to college not only in the Philippines but even abroad. These young, educated, and middle class Filipinos were the ones who brought the liberal ideas from Europe. So, third is an impact of European liberal ideas. The middle class Filipinos brought the liberal ideas here, particularly that of John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said that no government is legal unless it represents the inalienable rights of the people. Then the fourth factor is the liberal administration of Carlos Maria de la Torre. Carlos Maria de la Torre was the most loved and the most liberal-minded Governor General. He was the only Governor General who gave the Filipinos the freedom of speech and freedom of the press. He gave some privileges and exemptions to the workers of the Cavite Arsenal, such as freedom from polo and paying from tribute. The fifth factor was the racial prejudice or discrimination. Remember that Filipinos were greatly discriminated by the Spaniards. They treated them as their servants, which was very much inconsistent of their Christian teaching that everybody is equal before God and before men. The sixth factor is the secularization controversy or the secularization movement. Remember that when the converts increased in number, Filipinos were allowed to enter the seminary. Thus, it resulted to the two types of clergy. The seculars or Filipino priests or Filipino clergy, and the regulars or the Spanish priests or the Spanish clergy. The regulars always claimed that they are better than the Filipino priest. They were better prepared for missionary work because of their standard of discipline. They had three known functions. Number 1, introduce the faith. Number 2, convert the natives. Number 3, establish religious communities. So there were 5 religious orders or 5 regular clergy or orders or congregation that are expected to do the task that are mentioned above. So they are the Augustinians in 1565, Franciscan in 1578, the Jesuits in 1581, Dominicans in 1587, and the Recollects in 1606. The regular clergy were priests who live in the world. They were under the authority of the bishops and not members of the religious orders. Their primary tasks are the following. Number 1, the management of the religious communities. Number 2, the continuation of the work already laid down by the regular clergy. And third, to manage the parishes. The missionary efforts in the Philippines presented a unique case. Why? Because in other Spanish colonies, well-established parishes witnessed the replacement of regular clergy or the Spanish priest by secular priest or the Filipino priest in the management of the religious communities. In the Philippines, the regulars remained administrators of the parishes. There were two issues confronted among the clergy. First, the episcopal visitations. This issue arose due to the promulgation of Omnimoda Bull, which was passed by Pope Adrian VI in 1522, allowing the regulars to administer the sacraments and act as parish priests independent from the authority of the local bishops. This bull was in conflict with the reforms established in the Council of Trent, which declared that no priest could care for souls of the laymen unless they were subjected to episcopal authority that often came in the form of visitations. The regular clergy argued that if they allowed the visitation, then the religious orders or congregation will be subjected to two sources of authority. One, authority of the bishop, and the authority number two, the authority from provincial superiors who may at some point issue conflicting orders. So the regulars refused the episcopal visitations, but still hoping that they may not be charged of violating their vows of obedience to their own superiors. This visitation was countered by the regular clergy, who abused their authority by resigning from their post and leaving the parishes unattended. The situation was disastrous in the early stages of Christianization. So when the scarcity of secular priests often forced the government to give in to the wishes of the regular clergy. The second issue had to do with the management of the parishes. Regular priests control over regular priests maintained control over the parishes in the early stages of Christianization out of necessity because of the scarcity of secular priests to whom the parishes would be passed on. In the late 17th century, efforts were intensified to produce and train Filipino secular priests that by the 19th century they contributed in increasingly significant number. Despite this, the regular clergy usually contested the right of the secular clergy to the parishes due to the following reasons. Number one, Philippines was still remain an active mission, with some groups not yet Christianized. Number two, regular refuse to give up the parishes that generated large profits for them. Number three, Filipino secular clergy were not qualified and they were incompetent. Number four, the regulars viewed that seculars as potential leaders of future separatist movement. The seculars react strongly to these claims that the nature of the issue became one of the racial equality. At the forefront of this struggle to gain equality between Spanish and Filipino priests was Father Jose Burgos. The seventh factor that awakened Filipino nationalism was the Cavite Mutiny. The cause for mutiny was a decree released by Governor General Rafael de Izquierdo. He ordered that the arsenal workers would no longer be exempted from the tribute or tributo and polo or compulsory labor, a privilege they had enjoyed during the administration of Carlos Maria de la Torre. The mutiny happened on January 20, 1872, which was led by Sergeant Fernando Lamadrid, but it was immediately suppressed by the Spanish authorities. The Spanish government used this incident as a means to suppress the increasing calls for a more liberal administration. The worst effect of this mutiny was that the three Filipino priests were implicated, that they were the ones who led the mutiny due to secularization controversy. So, the eighth factor is the execution of the three martyred priests or the three secular priests such as Jose Burgos, Jacinto Zamora, and Mariano Gomez. As a result of the revolt in Cavite, several priests and laymen were arrested. Some of the Filipinos were exiled in Guam, but the three priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, were condemned to death by garrote on February 17, 1872. The three priests were accused of treason as the instigators of a mutiny in Cavite. This was an account given by a French writer, journalist Edmond Plauchut. The judgment of the court-martial was read to them. Upon hearing the sentence, Burgos broke into sobs. Zamora lost his mind and never recovered, and only Gomez listened impassively. He said this prayer, "Father, I know that not a leaf falls to the ground but by the will of God. If He wills that I should die here, His holy will be done." The three priests was executed before the public to instill fear to the Filipinos, but the effect was the contrary. This was presented by Apolinario Mabini in his book, La Revolucion Filipina. He said that the friars wanted to make an example of Burgos and his companions so that Filipinos should be afraid to go against them. But the patent injustice aroused not fear but hatred towards the friars and the regime that supported it. And there was a profound sympathy and sorrow for the victims. This sorrow worked as a miracle. It made the Filipino realize their condition for the first time. The death of the three martyred priests was the turning point of the Philippine history because it ushered a new era.